The time of your 30s is a decade of establishment, is a decade of consolidation. It's a decade when you begin to consolidate the achievements of the 20s. It's not a startup decade. Startup decade is the 20s. 20s is when you start business. 20s is when you start a company. 20s is when you start a family. 20s is when you start a ministry. Are you listening to me, somebody? The startup decade, the planting decade is your 20s. You want to start a ministry, that's the best time. You want to start a family, that's the best time. You want to start a business, that's the best time. You want to pursue a career, that's the best time. 20s, that's the startup decade. But the decade of the 30s is a decade of consolidation. It's a decade of solidification. It's a decade when you now begin to strengthen what you have. For instance, in your walk with God, it is a decade of consolidation in your walk with God. It's not a decade of experimentation. It's not a decade when you start asking some silly questions. Should God be? Is there God? Is there not? Those issues you settle it before you're 15. Should I do this? Should I? No. In your decade, in your walk with God, your 30s should be a time of conviction. A time when you establish in your relationship with God. It's actually a period where you don't need new answers to prayer to believe God. Where you must have proven the faithfulness of God. So you're no longer wobbling in faith. God has been good to you. So you can face challenges of life with gratitude, with joy. Because God doesn't need to prove a point to you anymore. So if in your 30s you're still wobbling in your faith, something is wrong. If in your 30s you're still asking silly questions like 10-year-olds, something is wrong. If you're 30 and some charlatan is still able to deceive you with the Bible, something is wrong. So in your walk with God, in your service for God too, you must become established in your 30s. That thing you're doing in the house of God, in the body of Christ, you should be established in it. Your 30s is the time in your family. That is when you have little children running around the house. Hello, somebody. The children are growing. It's becoming less and less about you and more about the next generation. You're paying more attention to their mind. You're building the family now. You're establishing the philosophy of your family, the culture of your family, the atmosphere of your family. You are solidified. That's what happens. It's not a decade of marriage. It's not a decade of childbearing. When you come to your business, it's a decade when you are fortifying things, consolidating, making things stronger. Different aspects of that business. You are identifying them. You are refining them. You're making them strong. This is what this should be. This is what this should be. This is what this should be. And you're fortifying things, strengthening things, reinforcing things. The same goes to ministry. You know, this is what my ministry is all about. This is my mission. This is my assignment. This is what I should be doing. This is how I should be doing it. And you're reinforcing it. You're no longer wavering. You know what to do. And you're now doing it. One of the evidence that you've done the 30s well is if you're a business person, you now have a well-organized business with the different units defined, with people involved in that business, with the identity of that business clearly defined, set up well, solid. The same thing with the ministry, set up well, solid. The same thing with the family, set up well, solid. In your walk with God, set up well, solid. So that as you are now approaching the 40s, you have a solid life.